Hi folks, I'm Chuck Black. This is 52 weeks of Python. On this particular week, we're going to do something special. Rather than teaching you about code, I'm going to teach you how to debug, specifically how to debug using the PyCharm debugger. If you look over here, you'll see, okay, he's running PyCharm, but what's that I see running inside PyCharm? Well, it is actually Quokka. I'm running Quokka within PyCharm now. At the very, very tail end of our discussion, I'm going to talk about how I do that. That's more of an advanced thing. But for the bulk of the time of what we're going to do, we are going to be looking just at simple code that we've already gone through, like this L01 device. And we're going to be saying, how can we debug this if we want to look at it and examine it and step through it one line at a time. So that's what this lesson is about. We start very, very simple. Then I give you some pointers on things that I look for and I do when I'm in the debugger. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so in the last lesson, we were talking about lists and dictionaries, and during the course of that, I introduced you guys to debugging in PyCharm. Now, maybe you already understand this, and if so, you may or may not get more useful information here, but if you haven't begun to write software and to debug it using the fantastic capabilities that are available in IDEs, then this session is for you. So I'm going to pause in between this lesson right here and the one that I'm going to do next. And I'm going to have this session be primarily, well, exclusively about debugging code. And so we're going to start with the simplest of applications. This is the one that we did before. And I thought I would explain to you a little bit more about how you debug stuff. Before I do that, though, it occurred to me that maybe some of you are like some of my friends are, and that I've been in past times, which is hanging on to either the old ways or what you're familiar with. That would be using a terminal window and maybe using VI or Emacs or maybe Vim in order to write your software and then to run it. And so I thought I would kind of compare the two, and you can see what you get with one versus the other. So I'm going to stop this now. You can see up here, there's a big stop button. You can also see down here, there's a stop button. Those do effectively the same thing. So I'm going to stop my debugging here, and I'm going to open up this window. And you can see I've located myself in the right location. And I've also set up these edit commands. I'm running Vim, which is a step above VI. It gives you a little bit of formatting of the text so that you can see strings and stuff of that nature. There are many plugins that you can get that make it better, but I've gone somewhere in between. VI, you get nothing. Vim with a ton of plugins, you get more. Vim with no plugins, you get what you see here. So you can see some keywords and functions are in this blue type color, or I guess that's, yeah, what is that? Aqua, something like that. You can see strings are in purple. You can see special characters like \n seems to be in a lighter color. I'm not sure exactly what that is. This is how you could enter data, and this is actually better than just regular VI. So what I did was I uninstalled Vim Tiny and installed Vim. If you go to, I think I looked at Real Python, it told me how I can install Vim, the full version. And so that's what I have here. I'm not going to actually write anything right at the moment, but I'm going to run it. And you can see if I wanted to run this, I just do Python 3, and then I give the file name of the Python file that I'm running. That's L01 device. And I can run it, and it prints out nicely, and I can see that I've got my simple print up here, my pretty print where I just use pprint to print things out, and it printed everything there. And then I had a for loop using fstring. So if you'll recall, I introduced you guys to a for loop and to an fstring, and I ended up with something that was looked a little bit nicer, at least in my opinion. Now, if I wanted to edit this, or if I wanted to debug it, what I need to do in order to debug it is I need to bug it. So I'm going to put a bug in here. I think just for fun, I'm just going to delete this. Now, you may have an eagle eye, and you may look at this and say, oh, well, I can tell that there's a missing quotation there. If I were to exit and then I were to run it, it's going to tell me, there's something wrong with this right away. Invalid syntax, I could look at this. It's telling me line number 6, so that gives me a little bit of a clue. It's pointing at this quote mark, so it's telling me that that is wrong. Actually, what's wrong is that I forgot the opening quote mark. So that's telling me a little bit. If I were to go back to this, you can see that, okay, my IDE, before I even run it, has told me, okay, I've got a problem here. In fact, I have 26 errors, as you can see. If I was to click on this, it would show me all of these things. You'll see this a lot in software. If you miss something like a quote, then it goofs up everything beyond it. If I were to fix that, you can see PyCharm pretty quickly recognizes that the error is no longer there. It fixes everything. It says everything's good. I'm good to go. It tells me that there's a typo, but that's not a problem. It doesn't give me a red X, but it gives me this check mark, so I know that it's okay. Let's go back here and let us open this up again, and I'm going to do a little bit more intelligent error. Here you can see my problem is fixed. This is what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to add something in here, and I'm going to add a key with the value of 1, and this is really any data can go here. If I can spell correctly, doesn't really matter what it is. Any data goes here. So here I have added a new key and some new data. So this looks like it should be okay. Whoops, I need to escape. Let's write this out. Let's see if I can type correctly. Let's exit. And now I'm going to actually run it again. And let's see what happens when I run it again. Okay, so I'm looking here at the bottom and I'm thinking, okay, well, something is not wrong here, obviously. It's telling me that L01 device.py, which is at line 27, there's going to be a problem. And it gives me the line that it failed at, and it tells me unknown format code S for object of type int. Now, because you're smart, you have a couple of clues that tell you what might be the problem here. Number one, look at all this stuff that it's printed out already. It's already printed out all of this stuff. In fact, in my for loop, it has gone through, because I'm smart, I can see it successfully printed out name and vendor and model and OS version, IP, etc. So that gives me a clue that, okay, it's probably the thing after that. If I go back to line 27, let me go back in here and look at line 27 so that we can just look at that. This actually, I don't have line numbers and I can't remember. How do I get to line 27? Let me see if I remember from VI. I do. So I'm at line 27. So it tells me that this line is in error. But I'm looking at that and thinking, well, what's wrong with that line? There's really not an issue with that line. It's worked before. What's my problem? My problem is this. As it turns out, up here, I put in this key, which is an integer. And it turns out in my F string, which is not, you'll notice, nicely formatted. If I were to go down here, let's see. Look at how my F string is formatted here. PyCharm is aware of F strings, and so it knows that these curly brackets are important and that it's representing an actual name for something, a variable that it's printing out, and then the formatting instruction. And here's value. Remember, key is that thing right there. Value is that thing right there. So these are actual variables. in my for loop, and this is nice. Now I'm assuming that if I'm running Vim with more stuff, there are versions that have intelligence about f-strings, since that's relatively new Python functionality. Maybe, maybe not. I'm not exactly sure. But if I look further at this, and then I might be able to infer, okay, well, what's going on here? The problem is my formatting is saying that the thing that it's trying to print, the key, is a string. And if I go back out and I look here, notice name was a string, vendor's a string, model's a string, version, IP, etc. is a string. And now I would need to have a split screen or something in order to see this if I'm using just my command line, my terminal. But I can see that this last item up here is actually an integer. So I think I can probably fix this. Let me go back into VI and fix this. And I can fix it by going something like this. I'm going to insert str. Now, if I were to just do this, I really don't know that there's an error, but there is an error in what I just did. Let's go back here and let PyCharm get updated to what I just changed it. Oh, I haven't saved it yet. So let me go and escape out of this, which I think I did, and I'm going to write this out. Let's go back here. Now you notice PyCharm is actually nice. It's telling me that there's something missing here. It's going to tell me unexpected expression part. It was expecting a closing parentheses. That's the thing that I actually need there. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to add my closing parentheses. And now this should be okay. And I'm going to run this. And let's see if it actually runs. So it ran successfully. So you can see it's a little bit more cumbersome, even in this tiny example, doing something like this. Now what I have built in here is I have print statements built in a lot of times with code like in my Quokka code. You can see there's a whole lot of code in here. And I don't have print statements in the middle of each one of these things. My discover task, I'm not printing things out all over the place. And so if I have an error in here, how am I going to figure out what that error is? I actually got lucky in this situation because I'm in the midst of, part of what I'm doing is printing stuff out. And that allowed me in this situation, when I had the error, to notice, okay, I did name, vendor, model, OS, version, IP. Those were all successful. It was the thing after IP, and as you can see, I've got it right here. The key with the value of 1 was what my error was. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do, we're going to put this away and ignore command line for now, and I'm going to teach you about how to do debugging in an IDE. You'll find that whether you're using PyCharm or any other IDE, they have many similarities. So if you're using something different, I suspect that what you learned here will translate quite readily to your own IDE that you prefer. Okay, so let's examine running and debugging code in the PyCharm IDE. So here I am. I have selected my Python module that we're dealing with. You can see I actually have it loaded here. How could I run this if I just wanted to run it? Well, one way to run it would be to right-click on the actual module in this program manager style of view, and I can come all the way down here and I can run L01 device. That's one way that I can do it. Another way I can do it is within this panel where the code is. I can just right-click somewhere, and you can see here again it says run L01 device. Now a third way to do it would be up here. You notice I have the green arrow that's like a play, which is to do run. Now what's really important to be aware of is this thing right here in this little edit drop-down menu type thing. That needs to have the value of the thing that you want to run. So in other words, a little while ago I was actually running Quokka, and my Quokka configuration is this Flask run thing. And so even though over here I had loaded L01 device, if I had come up here and said run, it actually would be running Quokka. So probably the first time I would need to come in here, and here it is, L01 device, and then I could run it. So now you notice I only have two real windows showing. One is the project view program manager style with the folders and packages and modules, etc. And then I have the actual panel with the data and the code or whatever it is that I'm looking at over here. So if I was to run this, watch what happens. I say run, and this window pops up over here, and it actually gives me the data. Now, this window you may see pop up either on the right or down here at the bottom. It kind of depends on where you've been playing around with it. You may have seen me do this before. You can come over here to the options menu and you can say move to, let's say I want to move it to the right bottom. Then it will move it, whoops, it moved it down there. That's not actually where I want it to do it. You see that I did that. Let's try to do this correctly this time. I'm going to say move to the bottom left. And so what that's going to do is it's going to put it down here at the bottom. Maybe that's how you prefer to see it. And this is my run window. You'll notice I actually have a debug window. If I look down here at these different tabs, I have a debug window. This is from when I ran it the last time I actually had run L01 device. This is the run one that I just ran. And so you can move these around. You can also take it and grab it and like throw it up here, and it will put it there. I can drag it back down here, and it will put it down here. So you have a number of options for looking at this. Now let's look at debugging because we know how to run it. If I want to debug this, I'm just going to do it right here. Actually, before I do that, I want to point something out. You see this red circle? If you've seen the other lessons, then you know this is actually indicating that I have a debug breakpoint set right here. All I need to do is click on or click off, and it will enable a breakpoint. And when I do that, when I run it, if I do the debug here, if I'm in my debug window, then I can do it here. Because I know what I'm pointing at, I'm going to do it from right here. I'm going to say debug L01 device. And what you'll see happen is this line is highlighted. That's telling me that PyCharm has actually stopped at this particular location. So you can see that it's giving me information over here on the left. That's telling me where it has stopped. If you are familiar with software, and then you will be familiar with the idea that this is the stack that it's running on. If I've called multiple functions, then there will be many things here. This will be at the top. But for us, it's just telling me that, okay, well, it stopped right there. That's not really of too much interest. And also the variables, I don't really have any variables that are doing anything yet. Now, the things that are important when running in a debugger are this: step over, step into, and step out of. So step over says run this line of code and go to the next line of code. It's a little bit confusing. When I see that word step over, I think it means, oh, avoid this line. In other words, it's like stepping over something on the road. I'm not stepping over it. I'm executing it and going to the next one. Step into, on the other hand, if you're calling a function, it will go down into that function. So most of the time, if you just want to step through your code one line at a time, you would do this. So I'm going to do that. And now I have run this one line of code, which is setting up my device object. And here you can see my device object. I can go over to my variables and I can expand it and look at the data. And you can see here here's the new one that I added when I was adding an error to our code so that we could look at it before. So this is actually pretty boring. What I'm going to be doing is just stepping through this. Okay, well, and now you may be saying to yourself, well, wait a minute, you just did a print statement. Where is it printing it out? Look over here in your debug window, It has debugger, that's what I'm looking at here. That allows me to look at the data. And it has console. Console shows me what is actually getting printed out to the console. And you can see I've just printed simple print, and you can see that it appears here. I can step through and I can see it actually print this information. So I can step through and look at this. At any point in time, I can go back to the debugger if I think that the data has changed or if there's something that I need to examine. So I'm just going to step through here in the console. Here's my pretty print. You can see that it did this printing of all of this data. It doesn't really, oh, that's the simple print. I haven't done the pretty print yet. I'm at this line. This is a good piece of information. I'm at this line. I haven't executed it yet. Once I execute this line, then I can see, okay, it looks like it's going to actually be printing all of this information for me. And here it is, my pretty print format. It's printing the dictionary with the keys on the left and the values on the right. And you'll notice that it has moved things around. It's not in the same order as it was before. That's something that pretty print seems to do. I think we talked about this before. It seems to be sorting these alphabetically. So 1 as a number goes first, and then I, M, N, O, V-E-N comes before V-E-R. So, and what's really useful is when I go through looping stuff. So a lot of times you'll see that there's an error and you'll want to step through this. Here I'm stepping through the next line. It's printing the line. Here I need to get down to the bottom so we can see that. I can use this to say go to the bottom and stay there. Now I'm printing the next line. Now I'm printing the next line. And if I did have an error when I got to that one that we had the error on before with the key of 1 and the value of whatever it is that we put in there, this would be where it would blow up. So the debugger, I would see that, okay, everything's running fine until I got to this line. So I can actually do this. If I want to stop this, I can click right here and that will stop it. Let's go reintroduce this error so that we have a general idea. So it is printing out, whoops, I did too much there, didn't I? What I wanted to do is get rid of this. Now I'm attempting to print out key, but you'll notice as part of my fancy F-string notation, I'm saying, okay, this is S, that means it's a string. And we're going to run into an error when it tries to print this out. So let's try running this again. And here's what I'm going to do. I've stopped right there, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a breakpoint right here. Now the other thing that's important, and I probably should have mentioned this before, these 3 items, step over, step into, and step out of, are important. This one over here is extremely important too, because if you intelligently set your breakpoints, you can say resume, like I'm going to do now, and you'll see it will hit that line and it will stop there. If I look at the console, you can see I've printed out all of my information. So I didn't have to step through it one at a time. I'm right here. Now what I can do is I can step through this one at a time. And you can see down here, I'm actually printing it out. I'm doing this one at a time. Let's do this and make sure that it's printing stuff out so that I can see it. I've done model, I've done OS, I've done version, I've done IP, and we believe this is where it's going to fail. If I was to look here, I could go into the debugger and I could say, okay, what is key? This is actually telling me that the key is an integer, and that's an indication to me that, okay, well, I'm trying to print this string up here, and that's where I'm going to run into problems. So I'm just going to say, okay, I'll just do a step over for this. And if I let it go, I can see, okay, well, here's my error. And this is actually a little bit harder to figure out, but here it is, line 27, just like before. This is the statement, and it says unknown format code S for object of type int. So it also tells me, all right, this is where I experienced a problem when Python was trying to print that out. So hopefully this gives you an indication. Step over, step into, and step out of. We haven't looked at that. Maybe when we get further and I demonstrate some more complicated code, we'll be doing the step into and the step out. But for right now, you get the general idea of how to do this, how to set a breakpoint, how to remove a breakpoint, and how to resume your program. Okay, so remember how I said perhaps some point in the future we'll do a debugging session where I do step into and step out of, and that might be some point. I didn't know when in the future. Guess what that point in the future is right now. And so we're going to look at nested data, something that we've done a couple of weeks ago, maybe a few weeks ago, and that seems to be a good example. Now, nested data comes through and it does some things with interfaces, and then it gets interesting with this create network thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run it. You can see I've run it already. It's got this up here. I'm going to go down. I've run nested data. So I'm going to go ahead and let this run. And here you can see that we have stopped at this location. Now, the amount of data that we have is a little bit more interesting than in the simple example before. You can see I've been messing around with something called interface. I have a list of interfaces that I've created at some point before. I have a device that I created that I had the interfaces attached to. See, I can go and drill down into each one of these and see what each of them is, the value is. So that's very handy. This is really good. Nested data makes it very useful. But what we're going to do now is, you can see, we're going to go and call this create network. So if I were to do a step over, it would allow me to create the network, and then it would pause when I get to this next line. But I want to go into create network. So in this situation, I'm going to say step into. And when I step into it, you see I'm within this create network. And within create network, the first thing that I'm going to do, interestingly, is create devices. So I want to drill all the way down to the bottom. So I'm going to say step into that thing. And by the way, keep your eye on this. We were originally at nested data. Now we're at create utils. When I step down, guess what? We're at create devices. We're at another one of these items. This is like a stack. If you're not a computer science person, you probably don't understand exactly how function calls work, but it operates like a stack. And every time you call into a function, something is placed on the stack. Your local variables are stored there. And then when you exit, you get back to the point that you were at before. And eventually, we'll be back at nested data. And actually here, interestingly, within PyCharm, I can look at where I called create network. Within create utils, I can look at where I called create devices, and I can look at that data. And then within create devices, I can see, okay, well, here I am within the create devices function itself to actually come through here. And what we're going to see is eventually we're going to call create device. So I'm going to set a breakpoint here, and I'm going to run. So I'm going to say, okay, go ahead and run all the way down there. Now you see we're just about to make this call to create device. And again, I'm going to step into it. And here I am in the function create device. You'll notice I have something else on the stack. For those of you that are interested in computer science, again, this is how it works with the stack when you make function calls. And now I'm going to do this creating device. Remember, we talked about a while ago that it's kind of ugly code because it's, it's got a lot of constants in here and everything is a choice. But it does a decent job of creating a random device for me. If I want to see, okay, does my device look like when I'm done, I can put a breakpoint there. I can say, resume this program. I've created it. Let's look at device. This is the device that I created. The name of it is R10LE. The vendor's Cisco. The OS is Nexus. The version is 7.1. The IP is that. If I just wanted to let things run, I think the only breakpoint I would be hitting, now I'm going to be hitting this create device again. So here I am at create device. I'm within this inner loop in create utils in this function called create devices. And I'm going to go ahead and call that again. I'm going to let it run. Here's the second device. My device, the name is R3LU. The vendor's Arista OS EOS. This is the version, and the IP address is 10.0.1.2. And I'm going to run again, and now I'm just going to undo this breakpoint, which is the one where I called create device, and I'm only going to be hitting return device. And as I'm going to click through this, you're going to see the actual IP address increment by 1. So I have 1.4, 2.1. So I guess I only have 4 devices per subnet in this particular situation, and I'm assuming once again that this subnet mask is 255.255.255.0. So I'm creating 4 at a time. I can see this happen. Eventually I'll get to wherever the end is, and then I'll be moving on to the next thing. If I say, okay, I want you to take me, instead of stepping to the next line, which I can actually step to the next line by doing this, and that will put me right back here where I called it, and I can step through this. And if I want to say, okay, well, I'm not really interested in anything except me leaving, what I can do, if I go up here and remove this, I believe I've done this successfully, what I can say is, I only want you to break when I step out. And so here we are where we called create devices inside create network. And right here, do I have any breakpoints in here? No. So what I can say at this point is I can say, I just want you to step me out again, up. And here we are. We're at the point where we called it in. If I were to go to the next line, I should have this thing called network set. If I go down here, here's my network. I have subnets. Of the subnets, I have 4 of them. Let's look at the first one. I have devices in there. Within my devices, I have device 0. This is a list, as you can see. And the first device is a dictionary. And this is the stuff that we were actually just looking at. We were looking at the various information. Remember, the second one, I believe, was Arista. Let's see if that's true. Yeah, Arista, EOS, those are the same. So here's an example of how you can use, intelligently setting breakpoints, stepping into, stepping out of, etc., to figure out exactly what your code is doing. The alternative is to put print statements everywhere, which can be helpful, but this, as you can see, is much handier and much more helpful. So while we're in here, a couple other things that might be worth noting or might be of interest to you that you can do in the debugger. If you came to a situation where you wanted to change the value of one of these in order to change how you are debugging stuff, maybe the value is wrong and you want to make it right, or right and you want to make it wrong, or just change it for some reason, you can right-click on the item and you can say set value, and it will allow you to change the value. That was 7. I'm going to set it to 28. Hit enter, and you can see I've actually changed that value. Now that doesn't mean anything in our situation here, but just so you know, you can do it. Now I will warn you, I have gone through and attempted to do this in other situations, and it turns out there's a bug in PyCharm where sometimes when you try to set something, it doesn't actually take. Like I'm going to change Arista to HP, let's say, and I'm going to hit enter, and you can see that it briefly said it was changing the value, but then it went back to where it was. And I've looked this up online. It's a problem that was identified a couple years ago. It still, as of August of this year, 2020, hadn't been fixed as of the last thing that I've seen, and that's in the professional edition, as well as the community edition that I'm running in. So just be aware of that, but it is something that you can do. Another thing you can do is you can come through and say, okay, well, I want to evaluate an expression. And what it's going to do, depending on the thing that I'm pointing at, it will allow me to evaluate it. And I could actually put in Python code that referenced a particular piece of data and it would evaluate it. In this situation, I happen to be pointing at this thing called name, as you can see, and it has filled this in with actually the Python code that represents that thing that I'm looking at. Remember, we've learned about nested data and that I can say network, and then my first subscript for the dictionary is the key subnets, and then the next key for the next dictionary is actually the subnet address. The next key for the next dictionary is devices, and that devices is actually a list. So here I'm at subscript number 1, which would be the second one, and the name, you can see that's what that is right there. If I were to go and say, okay, I want you to evaluate this, it would tell me the actual value, which you can see right here is that. I'm assuming if I were to do this and change this so that it's showing more than just that, you can see it's showing me that entire chunk of memory that it was looking at. If I wanted to say, okay, well, let's see what number 2 looks like, then it will go out and do that for me as well. And if I were to go down here to number 2, I can look down here where my cursor is pointing the mouse, R10LD. You can see that's the one that I'm pointing at. You can put anything that you want here. You could do mathematical stuff, etc. So I found this to be reasonably useful thing to be able to do. The last thing that I want to point out right here is something that you can do with the data that we are looking at, and that is this. You will sometimes see this thing called special variables. That's stuff that exists kind of outside the scope of my application. And I'm going to expand it here. And these are the special variables that Python knows about at this particular point in time. And you can see here's some of these magic variable names that some people have asked questions about. The name of the thing that it's running is actually main. I can't remember, I don't think in this particular application, but in others I've said if name equals main, then go ahead and do this. I think I described that in a previous session. Talks about some of the built-ins that are available. Let's see if there's anything else. I imported pprint. I imported create network. That's a function that I defined myself. I'm using copy. So you can see there's a fair amount of interesting stuff there in addition to that. Now the last thing that I want to show you is this. Let's say I get bored of this and I say, okay, well, I want to go look at something different. So I'm going to go and run my list versus dicts code. And I could go ahead and run this, but frankly, you can end up in strange situations. Oh, hey, guess what? Here's my if name equals main. I did add that there. But I digress. If I wanted to run this, it would probably succeed, but there's going to be situations where you become more of an intermediate to advanced developer where you're going to be writing a very complicated application that maybe has multiple threads going on or database where there are locking issues, and you're going to try to do something and it's suddenly not going to work. And one of the things that might be the problem, I would like to be able to just run this here, but here's a clue. Look at this. That thing is red and I can see that. And this little debugger has a green dot next to it. That tells me that something is actually running. Even though I don't have the debug window up, that is still running. Remember, I'm actually paused in this program. And I can give you an example of this in just a minute. What you need to do in that situation is just to kill what it is that you are working on. This is the normal state. You can see that this is gray, and that allows you to know that, hey, you can go ahead and run something. So I'm going to come here and run list versus dicts. While I'm here, I'll point out if I were to click on this and say run, guess what it would run? It would be running nested data. That's not what I want. So in this situation, list versus dicts, I could run it from here, run L09 list versus dicts. I could come over here and click in the window and say run L09 list versus dicts, or I could actually come over here as well and click on this thing and run it. But actually we're interested in debugging, so I'm going to debug this. And what I'm going to do, so I'm thinking that I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to have to edit this because remember it takes forever to run this in the debugger. So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, I'm not really looking at anything here. I'm creating my devices. Pretty soon it will come down and it will have completed that. And it's now at this line. You can see I have my devices here that I've created, all of these devices. And now it's going to do this tabulate, and that's the thing that's going to take a while. And so I'm just going to let it run, and then I will edit out the long wait that we have. All right, so I've actually killed that because I realized what I wanted to show you was not something that's specifically related to the debugger, but it's related to running code within PyCharm. And in this situation, I'm just going to run this application list versus dicts. So I'm running it right now. You can see it's filling in. This is my data is off to the right here. It's calculating the tabular output. That will take it a little while. It'll print us this nice table. And here, remember, we're doing list versus dicts. So if I did 10.0.254.254, you would be able to see that it takes 3,000 times longer to do it when I do it with a list versus when I do it with a dictionary. Now at this point in time, I might say to myself, okay, well that's good. I want to move on and do something different. And so I go, maybe I'm looking at this thing that I've got right here. This will look like gibberish to you because I don't believe at this point we've gone through this, but I will explain it when I get there. But if I wanted to just run this, I could think about doing that or even debug it, but guess what? Look up here. I'm still running the other thing. I do this to myself all the time. The problem is that I'm actually waiting for input. Do you see this down here? It's waiting for me to enter the IP address. And so this program is still running. Once again, I could get into issues. And the clue here, there's two of them. One is that there's this stop icon is red. It would be gray if nothing's running. And also if I look over here on the gutter on the right, this run window, there's a little green light that says, this is still running. If I was to stop that, actually, why don't I go back? Yeah, why don't I just stop it? If I were to stop that, two things will happen. You'll notice that the red square has gone to gray. That means nothing's running. Everything's good. I can do something different. Also, my run window doesn't have that green dot next to it. So just be aware of that. That's probably not something in the early days you'll run into very much, but certainly I run into it all the time when I end up getting bored with what I'm doing in my list versus dictionary. I end up in this situation where it's asking me for the IP address. You'll see it kind of barfed here because I hit the end, the stop button. That's why we got that error. If I had just hit return, it would have stopped equally as well, and I wouldn't have gotten any of this ugly stuff. So just look up here, make sure that things are not running when you're getting ready to run something. Hopefully that makes sense. And that's running code and debugging code within PyCharm. Okay, folks, this is for those of you who are interested in learning how you would run Quokka in debug mode. So this is really more of an intermediate, maybe even advanced level people who are interested in doing this. Even if you're a beginner, you might find this interesting. As you know, you can actually run only Quokka server by typing in this run Quokka script. If I were to say, well, what does that look like? I'm going to do run Quokka.sh. You can see down here what I end up doing after I've gotten into my Quokka directory is I just do a Flask run and I pass in host equals 0.0.0.0. That's so that folks from outside this particular VM that I'm running can access it. So from somebody from a different IP address. But basically, I just do Flask run. That's the general idea of how I run Quokka, the Quokka server service, that is. So you may be saying, okay, well, that's great, but why are you telling me this? I'm interested in debugging. Well, in order to debug running Quokka, it's not as simple as it might seem. There's not, in our debugging situations, we've had little tiny programs that we just ran. But if you recall, when you look at Quokka, there's a whole lot of stuff going on here. And at some point in the not too distant future, I'm going to do a walkthrough of Quokka, so I will be explaining to you exactly what happens. But initially, Quokka is built based on the Flask large application model, and so it runs this thing called init.py. If you've gone through Quokka from scratch, I think I talk about this. This is the thing that you eventually want to run, but this, you can't just say, okay, run this particular program, because it's not really a program. It's something that executes within the Flask context. So how do you figure out how to run Quokka from PyCharm in the debugger? And I alluded to this before. I actually have a configuration set up in PyCharm that allows me to do exactly that. And I've called it, you can give it whatever name you want, but I named it Flask Run. And we're going to look at that, but you may say, well, Chuck, how did you learn how to do that? The answer is by the magic of this wonderful thing we call the internet. I Googled how to, this is what I Googled running Flask in PyCharm. I've been at this guy's site before. Miguel Grinberg, I think his name is. I've heard him on Talk Python to me. This is what the gentleman looks like. He's very good at all of this stuff, and he actually says, here's how you do it. And so he talks exactly how to do it. Create a new configuration, select this particular item for the name field, etc. And if I was to click on this, what you would end up seeing in my, I just clicked on that. That's not what I wanted to click on. I want to click on Edit Configuration so I can look at it. And now I'm looking at Flask Run. So here it is. This is what we are supposed to be setting things up. This is my script path. You notice I'm running Flask. That's what I'm doing. I'm passing in run and also this host 00. So when you saw me do Flask run before, if you put these two things together, that's how you get that. Now there's environment variables that I've set. These are the things that you saw when I did VI of run Quokka. I make sure that those are set appropriately. And I need to set my working directory. Don't trust me for this. You can look at, I think that the Quokka VM has this set up. I'm pretty sure that it does, although I'm not 100% sure. But the bottom line is, because Flask especially might change in the future, you might want to always be cognizant to checking for any changes that there might be with new versions of PyCharm or new ways that Flask is run, etc. But that's how I ended up setting that up. When I do that, I can say, okay, Flask run. I'm checking over here. Do I have anything else running? No, I don't. I'm actually just trying this. Haven't run this in a while. Let's see if it runs. I'm going to click on run. It's doing Flask run here. This looks good so far. You can see that, yeah, this is actually looking like Flask. So now I'm running Flask in the debugger. I can set breakpoints and evaluate what's going on in that way. Now, as I mentioned with Flask, there are many threads running. So you can end up in situations where Flask is still running, but your one thread that you're looking at is broken at a particular point. And you can actually get yourself into a little bit of trouble if you have multiple breakpoints on multiple threads, and Flask is trying to serve all of those up for you. It's doable, but just be aware that it can get to be a little bit of a problem. So be cognizant of that. I tend to have just a breakpoint on my one thread that I'm interested in, and then I can execute that. All the other stuff runs happily as I'm debugging my one particular thread. Anyway, that's how you do Flask. run. That's how you do run Quokka in the debugger. And when I do my walkthrough of all of the Quokka code, you'll probably get a little bit more information in that. If this is kind of beyond where you're at right now, you're just trying to learn the basics of Python, no problem. Just put this in the back of your mind and you may want to come back to it later on. Hopefully that's helpful to you on running Quokka in the debugger.